Hello and welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to cover comprehensive steps for making the Dreamer Pack. The Dreamer Pack is a new pattern that I've released for a mini backpack. It includes 3 front pocket options. The pocket option I'm going to be covering in this video is the 3D pocket because it's the most complex and new of all of the options. For the remaining options, I'm going to leave helpful links to videos that I've done illustrating the techniques used to create those 2 types of pockets. To get it out of the way early, this is an advanced pattern. You need to have some experience making bags in order to understand most of what's going on. The pattern has really good illustrations, if I say so myself, but you might get confused at points. Hopefully the video will actually help clarify those points. The bag does require binding, and I know people are scared to death of binding for some reason, but it's really not that hard to work with. If this had a drop-in lining, the lining would basically be saggy. The bag also would not hold its shape. And yes, you can make this with a domestic sewing machine. I'll cover a little bit of the differences as you do construction throughout the video. I will be using my Juki, which is an industrial machine. However, if I really wanted to, I could have used the HD9. So let's get started. For pocket option 2, you need to have 1 exterior piece H, 1 foam piece H, 2 lining piece H's, exterior and lining pieces for both J and I. Pattern markings from piece H should be transferred. The pocket also requires 10 inches of size 5 zipper tape. Make sure to mark its center on each side of the tape. I'm using an industrial machine, so exterior piece H already has woven interfacing fused to it. I'm also not trimming down the foam. If you want to reduce bulk from your seams, you should trim a 1/2 inch from all foam pieces. Then spray baste or glue the foam to the center of its matching exterior. Finally, apply the woven interfacing to keep it in place. Grab all 4 gusset pieces and fold them in half lengthwise. Snip or mark their centers. Prepare the front panel by placing 1 lining piece H on top of the exterior piece H, wrong sides together. Align them using their markings. Place clips and baste through all layers 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Set the pocket's front panel to the side and grab exterior piece J and the zipper. Place exterior piece J upright on the table with the zipper just below it. The zipper head should be facing toward the left. Flip piece J over horizontally and line up its center marking along the top edge with the center marking along the top edge of the zipper tape. Place clips to secure your work, then baste the exterior to the zipper tape 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Grab lining piece J and set it right side up on the table. Set the zipper on top of it, wrong side down, with the wrong side of the exterior facing up. Line up the center markings along the top edge and place clips to secure. Now you can sew a construction stitch through all layers with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can actually do this in one step if you like. I do it separately to ensure my edges are aligned with the zipper tape as it can shift while sewing. Flip the exterior and lining pieces away from the zipper and line up their raw edges. Hold the zipper teeth and tug as you do this to fully unfold the gusset fabrics. Place clips along the raw edges to keep them in place. You're going to top stitch roughly 1/4 of an inch away from the folded edge to flatten the seam allowance. As you top stitch, continue to gently tug and finger press the seam. If this isn't done correctly, the upper half of the gusset will not match the width of the lower half. Now take exterior piece I and set it right side down on top of the upper gusset, which should be right side up. Line up the shorter edges and clip them down. The bottom gusset of the pocket is longer than the upper gusset, so it's gonna bow a bit. Grab lining piece I and clip its right side to the wrong side of the upper gusset. The upper gusset should be sandwiched between the bottom gusset exterior and lining pieces on the shorter sides. Here's what it should look like. Take this to the sewing machine and sew a construction stitch on each short end through all layers with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you've sewn the bottom gusset to the upper gusset, flip it right side out and tug at each seam to flatten it out. Top stitch each about a 1/4 inch away from the folded edge. Before you go back to the work table, sew a basting stitch along both of the free edges. This is going to prevent the exterior and lining from shifting when attaching to the pocket panel and front panel of the bag. Flip the gusset wrong side out and set it on the table so that the side with the zipper tape is facing up. We're going to attach the front panel, right sides together, with this side of the gusset. The notches and markings that you transferred from the pattern piece will help with this step. Align the top center mark of the panel with the center mark on the zipper tape and place a clip. The side markings line up with the top of the folded edge where the upper and bottom gussets meet. Line them up and clip. Follow up with the remaining marks on the bottom and opposite side. Now we'll place additional clips starting from each clip and moving outward. This will help us ease in the front panel to fit the gusset. The gusset is slightly smaller than the panel so that it pulls it inward and doesn't look lumpy or loose when flipped right side out. Save the corners for last. Once you're ready for the corners, they should sit nicely in the remainder of the gusset. Use your fingers to test for and roll out any pinches in the fabric. Now you could take this to the sewing machine, but those clips are going to pop right off as you sew. I highly advise replacing clips with staples when sewing gussets to panels. The staples are placed just inside the seam allowance, in this case just shy of 1/4 inch. It won't harm your fabric as any holes are hidden away in the seam allowance. Don't be shy. Add as many staples as you feel are necessary to confidently sew the gusset to the front panel. When you take this to the sewing machine, you're gonna sew it with the panel's lining on the machine bed. The gusset should be upright. It'll be the gusset that could lead to puckers, so having it on top lets you smooth it out as you sew. Remember that all seams for the pocket's construction have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you have a point turner or, as you see here, a screwdriver, you can use it to smooth out the gusset while sewing. You don't want your fingers to get caught on any of the staples or the machine's needle. Put the needle halfway down and lift the foot if you need some wiggle room. Take your time, there's no rush. When you finish that seam, you can remove the staples using a staple remover, or my personal favorite, pliers. Rip those suckers right out of there. The last step for the pocket is to bind the front panel seam. I like to use fold-over elastic for this. It's a lot easier to work with than quilt binding, and I didn't have to spend hours cutting strips on the bias. I don't pre-cut and clip the elastic around the seam. Instead, I use one clip to hold and sew sections at a time. I've found this to be a lot easier for my workflow. Sew the binding to the seam within the seam allowance. You don't have to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. All that matters is covering those raw edges. Flip the pocket right side out and gently push against the binding and roll it between your fingers to shape the seam. The pocket is now ready to be attached to the front bag panel. For this step, you'll need external piece A, pattern piece A, or the front pocket hole guide. External piece A should not have its foam attached yet, regardless of which pocket option you went with. Do not use piece H for this step. It's not the correct size for the hole that needs to be made in the panel. I prefer to use pattern piece A to mark where the pocket should be installed. However, if you'd rather use the hole guide, it needs to be placed centered to the exterior piece A, 1 inch above the bottom. Mark the hole on the wrong side of your fabric and cut it out. When using a rotary, I find it's easier to leave the bottom curves alone and cut those with smaller scissors for a bit more accuracy. Transfer the pocket holes markings to the front panel. I'm using a white gel pen to mark my vinyl. With exterior piece A facing right side up, set the pocket upright in the center of the hole. Pull up the top of piece A and fold it over and down. Then with right sides together, line up the pocket's top center marking with the top center marking on the hole. Place a clip here. Rotate to the side markings. The mark should align with the folded edge of the seam where the 2 gussets of the pocket meet. Clip this and move on to do the same for the remaining 2 markings. Just like attaching the front panel to the pocket gusset, work your way from the clips out, placing more clips and easing in the gusset fabric. Once you get to the rounded corners, they should fit neatly against piece A. Once again, I highly advise replacing each clip with a staple. Trust me on this one. It'll be so much easier to sew. Now we can take this to the machine and sew a construction stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The panel should be right side up while sewing. Take your time and use the point turner or screwdriver to smooth out exterior panel A as you stitch. You can unzip the pocket if you need some wiggle room. Remove the staples from the seam allowance, then flip everything right side out. Turn the front panel over so it's wrong side facing up and grab the remaining lining piece H. Flip the lining over so it's right side down and line up the coordinating markings. Clip everything down as you did with the pocket, then replace clips with staples. You're on your own if you don't use staples. I'm done reminding you. Now let's go to the machine. This is one of the trickier stitches, but you only need to attach the lining to the seam allowance. Don't worry about this looking pretty, as it'll be turned under and top stitched in a bit. Stop and pivot if necessary, and don't forget to use your point turner or screwdriver to guide the fabric. Remove the staples from the seam allowance. Now it's time to top stitch. We're going to fold the seam allowance inward toward the center. If you fold it outward, it'll make the front panel look pinched. Folding inward ensures the seam allowance is flattened and the panel remains the same size. You're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the seam's edge on the pocket gusset. Sew in small increments, putting the needle halfway down, pulling up the panel, and folding the next section of seam allowance inward. The only part that may be a bit tricky for domestic sewing machines is where the gussets meet. Use a humper jumper to give your presser foot some lift and hand crank those few stitches instead of using the pedal. You can do it. I believe in you. Ta-da! We're almost there. If you have a designer label, now's a good time to put that on. As you can see, the seam where you attach the pocket is nice and flat. To finalize the front panel, you'll need the foam and lining piece A's. Spray or glue baste the foam to the wrong side of the exterior. Remember, I'm using an industrial machine, so I haven't trimmed the foam down. Next, place the lining's wrong side on top of the foam, lining up the markings. Clip through all layers and baste everything together no more than 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Congratulations, the front panel is done. Let's get the back panel prepared. Here are all the pieces you need for the back of the Dreamer pack. First, you have the webbing. These will make the straps. The shorter 18-inch cuts will be the upper straps, while the longer 20-inch cuts will be the lower straps. I use different colored clips to help me remember. Next, you have the strap connectors, followed by the strap hook and the strap cover. Each of these are cut from a contrasting vinyl. The back panel, piece B, should have an exterior, a lining, and a foam. Make sure that all of the markings from piece B have been transferred to these cuts. Double-sided leather tape is a necessity for preparing the back panel. If you don't have any, fabric glue will work in a pinch. I'm using an industrial machine, so I'm going to spray baste my foam to exterior piece B, which has already been fused to woven interfacing. If you want to reduce bulk, trim the foam down by 1/2 inch all around, then fuse the woven interfacing on top of it and onto the exterior panel to encase it. We'll start with the strap cover. Mark the center lengthwise. The center is 1¼ inches from the longer edges. Place double-sided leather tape down the center line, then fold the raw edges inward to meet in the center. Press it flat with your fingers or a roller. I find it helps to make small marks along the edges on the right side of the back's exterior panel to indicate the top and bottom of the strap cover's placement. Place a strip of double-sided leather tape along the bottom edge of the strap cover's wrong side. Then set a ruler down on top of the panel to line up the lowest marks and give you a steady guide for placing the strap cover down. Set the edge with the leather tape centered to the panel and flush to the lowest marks. Press with your fingers to make sure it's sticking. Top stitch this bottom edge of the strap cover all the way through the back panel 1/8 of an inch away from the folded edge. Grab the strap hook piece and mark its center lengthwise. Just like the strap cover, place double-sided leather tape along the center line and fold the raw edges to the center. Fold it one more time to fully encase the raw edges. Place clips to hold the fold in place. Top stitch along this edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. To get the look we want, we'll fold the strap in half so that the top stitch is on the inside of the loop. The strap hook's ends will go under the strap cover, centered to the topmost mark on the back panel. Use some tape on the raw ends, then butt the top stitched edges up against each other so that they're flat and side by side. Now lift the strap cover and slide the strap hook inside. Grab the shorter 18-inch webbing. Place a little bit of double-sided leather tape on one of the raw ends, then draw some marks 1 inch away. Slide each end of the webbing under the strap cover, flush to either side of the strap hook. Take all of this to the sewing machine and do 2 lines of top stitching. The first line will be 1/8 of an inch away from the top folded edge of the strap cover, while the second line will be 1/4 inch away. Sew slowly and don't be afraid to use a humper jumper to get over the thicker parts where the hook is inserted. Both top stitches should be sewn in the same direction to avoid slightly twisting the strap cover. Roll up the webbing and place some clips to keep them out of the way for the rest of the bag's construction. Grab your strap connector pieces and some scrap heavyweight interfacing. I'm using Decoville Light. Draw a line down the center of each strap connector, and then another line 3/8 of an inch away from the longest edge. That's the one with the little triangle indentation. Now cut out 2 small triangles from that heavyweight interfacing. The triangles should not extend to the lines that you've drawn. Fuse one to the wrong side of each strap connector. We need to place some double-sided leather tape on the longer edges to help hold them in place while sewing. Place the tape, then fold each of the longer edges up 3/8 of an inch, essentially flush with the top point of the inverted triangle. Then we'll fold each strap connector in half along the center line. Place clips to secure the raw ends. Grab the longer 20-inch webbing. Make a mark 1 inch away from one of the raw ends for each piece of webbing. Insert that end into the straight bottom fold of a strap connector. Clip it down so it doesn't move. Repeat this for the remaining webbing and strap connector. We're going to do 2 lines of top stitching along the folded edges with 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, respectively. Start at the upper point, making your way down to the corner, and then to the right to make an L-shaped top stitch. Once you have each strap connector top stitched 2 times, you can trim the little triangles off the raw side to make the edge flush. Starting with the left side, orient one of the strap connectors such that the webbing is angled up and to the right and the raw edge is facing left. Line up the bottom point of the raw edge with the strap connector placement mark you made earlier. Clip this in place. For the right side, orient the remaining strap connector such that the webbing is angled up and to the left. Its raw edge will be facing right. Line that up and place a clip. Roll up the bottom straps and clip them together so that they stay out of the way while sewing the rest. Now we're going to attach the lining. Place the lining and exterior panel wrong sides together. Line up their markings and clip as much as you feel comfortable with. Because of the extra bits and pieces attached to the exterior panel, the lining may look a little poofy and loose. It won't be once it's sewn. You'll baste the edge through all layers with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. While sewing, make use of the humper jumper to help you get over the strap connectors. Sometimes their pointed tips get caught in the presser foot, so the humper jumper helps you glide over them with ease. When you're done basting everything together, grab some scissors and trim away the excess bits of the strap cover if you haven't done so already. Congrats! The back panel is now complete. Lay out each of the pieces of the main gusset on the table as they will appear when sewn. The back of the zippered gusset is larger than the front of the zippered gusset. Both are tapered and have a curve, so it's important not to mix these up. Piece C makes up the sides and the bottom of the bag. It has a slight taper, so I find it helps to draw an arrow pointing up to the top to remind me which side attaches to the upper half. Start by folding the zipper in half and marking the centers on each side of the tape. Line up the back gusset piece center with the tape center and flip it over horizontally so that the right sides are touching. Place clips along this edge, making sure the fabric's edge is flush with the zipper tape. Take this to the sewing machine and do a basting stitch with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Lay the exterior back gusset on the table wrong side down with the lining piece D right side up. Flip lining piece D over horizontally, lining up its center with the zipper. Make sure the fabric's edge is flush with the zipper tape while placing clips to secure it. Now you can sew the construction stitch along this edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the exterior and lining back pieces away from the zipper. With wrong sides together, align their center back edges and clip. Align and clip the remainder of the exposed edge. When sewing, you'll want to hold the zipper teeth with one hand and with the other grasp the back gusset and give it a slight tug to make sure the seam is fully rolled outward. This is important because the edge that attaches to the zipper has a slight curve. If you don't tug, you'll lose that curve when top stitching. Top stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and leave the clips along the edge when you're done, as you'll want those in place for later steps. Now we'll attach the front zipper gusset. Grab the exterior and lining piece E's. Set exterior piece E right side up on the table such that the curve is on the bottom. Line up the top middle mark with the middle mark on the unsewn zipper tape and flip it backward horizontally. Place a clip in the center, then additional clips along the edge, ensuring the fabrics are flush. Baste these together with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Set the lining piece on the table right side up and place the front of the zipper on top of it with the exterior's wrong side facing up. Line up those middle marks and place clips. The top edge should be flush to the zipper tape and exterior, just like the bottom half of this gusset. Sew a construction stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just as you did for the back zipper gusset, fold out the lining and exterior piece ease to expose the zipper and prepare for top stitching. Don't forget to give the fabric gentle tugs to fully unfold the seam. Top stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and continue to give those gentle tugs and finger press while stitching. For this step, you're going to need both lining and exterior cuts of piece C. We'll start with the exterior pieces. Lay each exterior piece C right side up on the table and butt up their bottom edges. You can double check the markings to make sure you're using the bottom edge. Flip the right piece over and toward the left so that the bottom edges are aligned and right sides together. Place a couple of clips to hold it down, then repeat this for the lining pieces. Take both sets with you to the sewing machine. First, sew the exterior pieces along the center bottom edge with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then, immediately unfold them and set the exterior right side up on the machine bed. Using your fingers, spread the seam allowance apart. Top stitch a 1/4 of an inch on each side of the seam. This will tack it down so it doesn't deform the bottom of the bag. Repeat these sewing steps for the lining. Now we can attach the bottom gusset to the upper gusset. Flip the bottom gusset exterior over and put it on top of the upper gusset's exterior, right sides together. Line up the shorter ends and clip them in place. You'll need to do this for both sides of the gusset. Turn this all over so you see the lining of the upper gusset and set the bottom gusset's lining on top of it, right sides together. Adjust the clips on the shorter ends to include the lining. The bottom gusset is longer than the upper gusset, so it will loosely hang from either side of the upper half. Here's what it should look like. You'll sew a construction stitch on each of the shorter ends through all layers with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now flip the gusset right side out and tug on each of the seams you just made to fully unfold them. Place clips on each side of the seams to keep them snug. Also line up the center bottom stitches of the lining and exterior bottom gussets and clip on each side there as well. Flip it back to being inside out to prepare for top stitching. You're going to top stitch on the bottom's side of the seams you just created with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now before leaving the machine, sew a basting stitch all the way around each side of the gusset using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This will keep everything together for the final assembly. To finish up the assembly, we need to attach the front and back panels to the gusset. This is actually the same process as what was done for the 3D pocket, only bigger. We'll start with the front panel. Set the gusset on the table with the front upper gusset side facing up. Locate the 4 marks. Put the front panel right side down and line up its top center mark with the top center mark of the front zipper gusset so that their right sides are touching. Place a clip here, then move to one of the side seams. The side seam mark on the front panel should line up with the folded edge of the gusset's side seam. Clip it down, then align and clip the remaining marks. Starting from each clip and moving outward, ease in the front panel and place clips, leaving the bottom corners for last. By the time you reach the bottom corners, they should fit nicely into the gusset. Roll the fabric between your fingers to smooth out any puckers before clipping. Now before sewing, replace the clips with staples. If you skipped ahead to this timestamp and didn't hear my sermon about staples, then you deserve to be confused and should feel ashamed. Shame! Shun the non-believer! All hail the stapler! You'll sew the front panel to the gusset using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You also want to sew it with the panel against the machine bed and the gusset upright. It'll be a lot easier to smooth out the gusset fabric if it's on top. Speaking of smoothing, don't be afraid to use a point turner or a screwdriver to move the gusset around and hold the fabric while you're sewing. The front panel is relatively simple. There's nothing that would introduce bulk to this particular seam. When you're done sewing, remove the staples and leave everything inside out. The steps are the same for attaching the back panel. Locate all of the marks and clip the panel to the gusset, right sides together. Then of course replace the clips with staples. Just like the front panel, you'll sew the back panel to the gusset with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. The gusset should be facing up. The only hairy parts of this seam are near the strap connectors. That's where you're going to experience the most bulk. Even if you have an industrial sewing machine, you're going to want to take these areas slowly. Don't be afraid to hand crank the needle to have more control. Now it's time for everyone's favorite step, binding! Yay! Trim up the seam allowances of the front and back panels. Don't cut away much, just trim them down to even out the panel and gusset fabrics. This makes it easier to wrap the binding around the seam allowance. For each panel seam, apply the binding. I covered this in detail during the 3D pocket instructions at the beginning of the video. If you skip past that part of the video and need more details, you can find it there. Look at that gorgeous binding. Okay, I could have done better, but I'm under a lot of pressure, you know? Anywho, now you can flip the bag right side out. I like to start by turning the upper gussets, then moving on to the bottom half of the bag. This eases any tension you may put on the zipper during the flipping process. Never pull the fabric, always push. Pulling leads to ripped seams and you have a lot less control over the momentum. Once you have it flipped, run your thumb around the bound edges on the inside of the bag to smooth them out. Thanks to the foam, the seams should look really nice and maintain the bag shape. Zip it up and bask in the glory of your sewing skills. The very last step is to connect the straps. If you haven't done it yet, use a lighter to melt the ends of your webbing so it doesn't fray. You should have 2 1-inch tri-glides and 2 1-inch rectangle rings. I'm going to be using rivets to affix the straps to the hardware. It'll look nicer and it's way easier than sewing them. Take one of the upper straps and put its raw end over and around the top edge of a rectangle ring. The raw edge of the webbing should be tucked under the strap by at least an inch. Use a leather hole punch to make one hole just above the ring. It should go through both layers of webbing. Then you can place a rivet through the holes. Don't set it yet. Go ahead and do the exact same thing to the second strap now. Set the rivets using a press or the old-fashioned way with a mallet and patience. Grab one of the lower straps. The side facing away from the back panel is the one that will be aligned with the upper strap. Take its raw end and pull it up the bottom half of a tri-glide, then over the center bar and down through the top half of the tri-glide. Slide the tri-glide down a bit so you have more of the webbing to work with. Making sure not to twist the webbing, take the raw end and loop it over and through the lower bar of the matching upper strap's rectangle ring. Now slacken the webbing in the tri-glide to give you some space for the next step. Take the raw end and bring it down to the underside of the tri-glide. Push the raw end down the bottom half of the tri-glide, under and over the center bar, then up the upper half of the tri-glide. Fold the webbing about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. It should now be wrapping the tri-glide center bar. Punch a hole in the center of this overlap just above the bar and place a rivet. Now repeat this for the other strap and press to set each rivet. And now you're done. Time to go eat cake and drink some wine. And there you have it, a cute little mini backpack. Not that I ever thought in my life I would shimmy for a YouTube video, but here we are. Enjoy your new make and feel free to email me or leave a comment below if you have any questions or concerns. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel to see more videos and tutorials just like this. Happy sewing!